at the very early age of 14, I would say I was driven by the anger that something wasn't right, to want to know, why is this not right? And so I got involved with door-to-door kind of campaigning. I wanted to be involved to see what was going on. At the time, it was door-to-door campaigning. And I think the Indian community really organized themselves, and I wanted to be part of it. So the very early one was when the Transvaal Indian Congress at the time was operating on behalf of the banned African National Congress. And so I became conscientized to some of the politics quite early because of that one experience. But it wasn't just the one experience. Then my eyes opened up to a lot more that was happening. Then you realize you're only in a school with only Indian people. You're in a your entire lifestyle is just with Indian people, and that just wasn't right, you know. Luckily, I had lots of exposure to others, and so we kind of started to bridge between different communities. And there was one woman, her name is Razia Saleh. She was actually not that much elder than us, but she took on quite a leadership role that was about organizing people, conscientizing, and it was driving the content of the struggle. So I got attracted more to that. Then there was this woman in my definition of a role model. Her name is Yasmin Karim, and she defied her own family tradition where women were not allowed to even study, to do certain things. And I was in that space. I didn't appreciate the women that were behind the scenes enough myself as well, because I wanted to be where the meetings were being held. I wanted to be part of the action. But at the same time, those wives and mothers that were holding things together, that were keeping it together. There was recently I visited a family that showed me how the mother used to be actually not afraid of bringing in activists that needed to be housed somewhere while they were in hiding. You know, they needed a home. And the things that those women did was extraordinary. We were exposed to the life of Che Guevara. We were exposed to, Solomon Mahlangu's life and times, Steve Biko's writings, and we would have discussion groups. So there was that point of making sense of why are things the way they are. And then remember that we also had the Soviet exposure, you know, and a lot of the socialism, communism kind of thinking. And so there was this inherent need to ensure human rights for everyone. But it didn't come from just one source. It came from multiple sources. I was one of the only ones amongst my siblings to actually get a bursary and go to university. But I think being rooted in activism, you then bring your activist education into your chosen career, and you transform your chosen career in that way. And that's what I started to do. But then I was the only one that was qualified as an occupational therapist. That's the one I chose. That was in my entire community. We were like a handful. We were about 3 of us that were from non-white. That was the rest of the class was graduates were whites. So that was a struggle on its own, right? So I think for me, the first round of formal activism, other than being recruited in my community, was those days of the tricameral elections. and I was part of that. So in 1983-84, there was the decision taken by the apartheid government at the time that Indians and colored people would be given voting rights, but not our African brothers and sisters, right? So we campaigned quite strongly against that. And we had many, those were part of the door-to-door campaigns that we started. And that was the first, there was 2 rounds of tricameral elections, 1984 and 1989. In that 89 year, there was this announcements that some of our Ravonia trialists were going to be released. So there was this mixed bag of emotions going on. But in 89, that tricam election in my community was one of the biggest campaigns that we had. But by the end of the day, I don't know what happened. I think the police that was on guard, they just grew tired of all of us. So what they did was they leashed out the dogs. They started to really, the Batons, they came out strongly. And so then people dispersed chaotically. And so then they came after everybody. But it was at that one day that I was arrested with 14 other people, other young people. We were 14 of us arrested, and then they took us into the police vans, the Caspers that we would call them at the time because of the way they looked. And we were dispersed at 3 different police stations. So we didn't know where we were going to be taken, but I think the community's energy was so strong at the time, it strengthened our campaign rather than broke us down. And so there was a case called State versus Dayal. That was my surname because I was the first sort of accused. And my 2 years of university was my first 2 years. I had to appear in court 5 times. But it was really, we had the legal counsel that came in, and it was this kind of demonstration, but it was under a state of emergency, so-called state of emergency, to be able to arrest people just like that. There was a group of us that recruited, and I volunteered to be part of that group because of my own consciousness, and volunteered to be that, disseminator of information, so that you could spread the word that this is what the government is trying to do, that it's not right. So we had to write pamphlets up and, mass produce leaflets, and we were going door to door campaigning. So I had a group of young people, but also community leaders that were organizing under the Transvaal Indian Congress, the TIC. That was the 2 groups, Natal Indian Congress and the Transvaal Indian Congress. Remember that we still had a band, African National Congress, at the time. But what was being done at the time was that we were organizing around civic structures. So religious organizations, sports organizations, youth groups, cultural, and you have the cultural groups that were there. So there was this very deep, how can I say, appeal to your moral and ethical values as a society through these campaigns. So there was a lot of sports kind of unified sports events that we were attending. We were attending a lot of the cultural and jazz festivals that was with our, activist groups that were very mixed across the races. We used to attend, it was the fun part of being activists, not just the campaigning and equality part. And that's where we began to, have that level of camaraderie that, you belong somewhere, right? It was a demonstration of what the future would look like. We also remember going to other events from other communities, that we would take a bus load of us and travel to another community that was having the events that we wanted to join in with. So there was this cross, pollination of our activist groups, that we would meet another activist group that would host us. I also joined a lot of the student politics on campus at the time. You know, those were the places where you begin to see how student politics impacted on everybody else's lives as well. And one of the campaigns that I consciously got involved in was when we as student health workers were allowed to go to all the hospitals, but not to the white hospitals, because you couldn't work with white patients. But the white student health workers could go to the black hospitals, right? So what was that was so wrong? And so we had a student group that exposed that. So I got involved in those kind of campaigns to conscientize students and put pressure on the administration of the university that this is not right. So there was various campaigns that was happening, that you are guided by your one ethical moral standard, that what is human rights must be equal treatment of everybody. I was asleep the one night and the police would come in and raid our home because they were after some documentation, some propaganda, they would call it at the time. But when you get raided like that, it was some kind of intelligence that the police would know that they must break you down to get information out of you. And I think as activists, you get to know that some things you just don't say, right? So there was this line of command, and I think there was calculated risks that people had to take to get to places and know what was happening. So some would take that to know and come back with the intel to tell us what's going on. It was all part of it, and I think that we knew what we had to do. Grieving was a very silent process, a very closed behind the scenes process. And I think part of that grieving and healing that didn't happen is the aftermath that we're experiencing today, as we see that, there's a lot of discontent with how things have played out. I still see myself as young and active, although I'm in that space of advising now. And what's nice is a lot of young people that want to know to come, and they take up this baton, right? So I can identify myself in some of these younger ones that take the responsibility to get involved. Yours is a different struggle. You have information overload. You need to define a purpose behind what you do. I think it's fair to say that everybody has a unique talent to offer this world. And young people must know what is that talent, what is their unique contribution, because that will give you a position in this world wherever you are.